to. It's like time collapses when I talk to you. It's funny.
God bless you. 2 weeks tonight, I'm going to be in heaven because Hugh and the Headstones come back to Winnipeg. Hugh, I just want to say this one more time because I say it nearly every third time I'm on the air. So picture this. It's 1979. I went to see a band called Aerosmith. AC/DC is opening the show. Bon Scott blew me away. Bon Scott was absolutely incredible. I had never, ever felt or seen a frontman like that. So I go through the 80s. I don't see anybody that's kicking my butt. Nobody that's talking to me. The 90s come by, and I see this band called the Headstones, and I see this guy called Hugh on stage. So what's my takeaway? The two best frontmen that I have ever seen is the late Bon Scott and Mr. Hugh Dillon. Thank you, thank you, thank you for always entertaining me. You're that pinball machine, sir, zinging from one side of the stage to the other side of the stage. And God bless you with the sharp dialogue and the naughty humor. You do what a frontman has to do. You entertain. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm great. You know, it's like you've been one of those people who, you know, recognizes rock and roll. That's why I love talking to you way back in the early 90s, because it's a certain kind of rock and roll that is unpretentious and just comes from your soul that you just, you know, I was a huge AC/DC fan. I love a certain brand of rock and roll, but just, you don't have to define it. You just get it. And then when I speak to people who are passionate about music like yourself, it's you know, so many people they just don't love rock and roll the way we do, you know, or they like, there's so many other things, and fair enough, but it's such a specific art form that it's always great to find like-minded people. So I thank you and I applaud you for keeping that flame alive in every way possible, Howard.
Well, God bless you, sir, because I worry about the future of rock and roll, and the Headstones say to me that rock and roll will never die. Rock and roll will never die. And especially after living and breathing with the latest record, kudos. It's a band. It's a band, yeah. The Headstones. It's not Hugh Dillon and company. It's a band, and I absolutely love that. There are tracks on this disc that really take me to a special place. Kingston. Obviously, it was recorded before the passing of Gord Downie, but the words that you said about Gord Downie in 1989,
yeah.
I cried when I first heard it. I cried more a few weeks ago. How important was it for somebody in your hometown to have that affirmation from a guy like that that's on the scene?
Well, what's funny is that what I referred to before that postcard was after we left high school. So, you know, my take away is I still don't look at Gord as the icon in the hip, because I look at him as, you know, we were two kids who sat beside each other in grade 11 who would sneak into this bar to see the, you know, these great musicians. For whatever reason, Kingston got Luther Guitar Johnson to play there. And Gordon and I would go there, getting underage, and I always had some weed, so we'd go and smoke some pot with the, you know, in that case it was Luther Johnson. And he recognized these two white kids who, what we just talked about a moment ago, had this gigantic passion for authentic rock and roll. And this was a great old black blues man who just, you know, it was a tradition. You know, he played town to town. He gave it every night, and you knew he did. And then, you know, you would talk to him later. So Gordon and I had a really great connection as young men who loved rock and roll, and we doodle, you know, the Doors logo, or we talk about Bob Dylan lyrics, and we always had this great relationship. And then what was fantastic is it never changed. We never had a harsh word. And then when he got the hip and got into that, got a record deal, he didn't he was such a decent and kind guy, and never, he always looked you in the eye. And then he helped me get a record deal. And that postcard that was in the basement, it was we're playing in Europe, and he knew I had a demo tape. And he got, he helped me get to the right people, and showed up at our showcase, him and Paul, when the Universal, and at the time it was the MCA reps, were there. And having that guy, because then he was gored down in the hip, so he had some influence and some weight. And we played our first shows with them. So for me, it just, I go back, that song just was like a stream of consciousness about us growing up in high school and the guys we knew in Kingston and how we spent our time. And then it was that validation of that postcard, because the hip were in Europe, and I was trying to put posters up on the street, and I believed I had this band called the Headstones, and I believed that, but you know how apathetic the world is, and you had this guy, now he's in Germany or somewhere, and took the time to sit down and write me a postcard to say, stick with it. And he always believed in my songwriting. So it was just, for him, when he passed away, and just when I knew he was sick, it was, it just kind of knocks the wind out of you. And I was lucky enough to send him some of those lyrics before he passed away, just to get his blessing, and for him to know I was thinking about him and I loved him. And it was just, and that song's a special song because of that. It's just one of those songs that's, you can just close your eyes and sing it. And for me to be right back there and walking down those cobblestone streets, going into that bar, and it was the seeds of rock and roll in Kingston for me, and for Gord, and for the, Rob Baker from the Hip, and Paul, and Gord Sinclair, and, it was just, and a lot of other musicians. David Usher from Moist went to the same high school, so there were a lot of artistic kind of people who came out of that, and it was just because, for whatever reason, we were exposed to authentic rock and roll.
Thank you for keeping it alive. 10 years ago, at a very small room in Winnipeg, Jared Leto is on the last day of a tour with his band. I was in the dressing room to interview him. The vibe that I was getting, the last place that he wanted to be, was not necessarily Winnipeg, but anywhere, because the tour was, for lack of a better appropriation, sucking. He wanted to get home. We spoke, and I said to him, and I don't know if he'd ever remember this, I said, you have something special there. You have a gift, sir. Please, please, please don't give up. Have you ever met the man? One, and number two, what do you do, or what did you tell yourself at the times when you felt like, you know what, I'm beating my head against the wall?
I haven't met him, but I'm a fan of his acting for sure. And I saw a documentary about their band, and I just like people who don't give up, because it isn't easy, and you've got to beat your head against the wall, because if you don't go through that and everything's handed to you, there is no artistic satisfaction. I mean, even with this last album, that Headstones Little Army, it's the same thing. It wasn't just handed to us. That was a particular Ian Taylor, who's the president of Cadence Music, came to the show, saw us play, got up and played drums actually on Devils on Fire, and believed in the band. But, I mean, there were no record deals being handed out for the Headstones, believe me, for Little Army, because, just the nature of the business and everything else, you've got to find your champions, and it's the same way, and there's so much going on out there, and so much of it is driven by the usual stuff, business and numbers and money and competition. And what speaks to people is going back to the authenticity. And this was a president of a label who just gets it. I love it. I get it. And our fans are the same way. We've got loyal fans, and fans in Winnipeg. And I've said this a million times, Howard. They've always been there from day one. It's like that Portage and Maine kind of vibe. Ottawa and Winnipeg were the two cities that grabbed us first, and they're the most loyal, and we would write songs and they would respond to them, and they often influenced what made it onto the record because they didn't need to hear it on the radio first or see a video. They just knew whether they liked it or not and responded accordingly. And, even that gig, when I go back to think about gigs that I've had in the last couple of years, what ones really stood out? It's that gig at the Burt. I went, what a crazy-ass great gig, and, you were in the balcony, and I didn't even know you were in the balcony until later, but it was just like, those are just gigs that you want to go, with the Jared Leto thing. It's like you could find yourself in any town, anywhere, and the gig isn't going to your liking. But you've got to find a way to kick the shit out of it, for lack of a better word, anyway, because there's going to be somebody in that audience who may want to play rock and roll or who's sitting on the fence themselves, and they will see your band and go, you know what, I saw you guys play in the middle of, nowhere on some crummy night opening for some crummy band, and you guys kicked ass. And that's what I go for, because I know that because I've seen that. I've seen some band that, the audience isn't responsive. The audience is there to see somebody else. The PA's not good. They've got to have their drums set up in front of the opening band, and nothing is going their way, but they come out and kill it because they've got heart. And if you've got heart, then you'll forever be playing rock and roll. If you're in it because you want to see how much money you can make, or fame, or if it's not in those songs, if it's not in those lyrics, and you haven't figured out how to twist the lyrics into the melody to have a voice and a point of view that people subconsciously or consciously get, then you're just at a factory printing out whatever you think is going to be popular. It's pointless.
Boy, you blow me away, Hugh. One last thought, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Remembrance Day means a lot to me. Remembrance Day, to you being a Canadian, do you ever work that day? And if you do you say anything special?
I haven't played that day in a while, or I would have remembered. And yeah, you always acknowledge it. You can't not acknowledge other people's sacrifices and how we got here. My uncle, my namesake, Hugh Dillon, he ended up living in Detroit and had a family there. My dad's brother was in the war. So yeah, you remember. There's just no way you can get around it. Nor would you want to. That's where we all come from, and they were huge sacrifices, and the world was a very different place, and facing just an incredible evil. And I don't forget. It's different for everyone, but and I'm older too, and I studied history at university, so I have you get it on that level. It's just these battles had to be fought, and they were ugly.
Hugh, thank you. I saw a movie called Lucky the other day. I can't not stop thinking about it. Please find it, watch it, and we'll talk about it. Harry Dean Stanton's last movie.
Okay, I'll watch it before I hit Winnipeg.
God bless you. Thank you for the time. We'll see you in 2 weeks.